We're talking about the creation of man, the development of self. I'm born dead to God in the Spirit. That makes me self-centered. It makes me insane. I don't know who I am. And now on top of all of that, I had to find something to trust and to cope with. And now I'm full of idolatry. So we have hurts in our lives, and we have to find a way of coping with that hurt. And that coping mechanism is actually an idol. Now there's a long variety and a long list of idols. One idol that I'd like to mention is that I believe that sometimes insanity is actually idolatry. And I'm not saying that it's always that way. And I believe that there are people with chemical imbalances. I don't think there's nearly as many people as they would like you to think. And one of the most well-known doctors in Australia, I was talking to him, he's a Chinese fellow, and I said, what do you think about medications? And he said, oh, there's no question about medication. The people will get better if I can get them off of it. And so he's working all the time to get them off of the medication. And I've seen the same thing that happens. Because when you're having mental problems, one of the things you do if you take medication is you'll stop being active physically. And now the energy that was being used in your body is actually driven into your mind where the problem is, and things are getting worse than they were before. Now, I'm not against medication. There's times when people need it, and they need it at a point where it can bring them to the place where they can hear. If they can't hear, it doesn't do any good to talk. And so I'm not against that, but I'm saying in our society, we have a vested interest in this whole business of insanity. And all insanity is that when the pressure's on too tight, what I do is I go back into the cave and I hide there. Now, there's very few people that let go of the rope, but some people do let go of the rope. And at that point, it's worthwhile to go in and get them. But there's also vested interest in being insane. When I was in a mental institution talking to a fellow, I just watched him for a day, and I noticed that his sisters came and they brought him cookies and model airplanes and the magazines that he wanted. They doted over him and they always left crying. And he'd been in there for years. And then I noticed that whenever one of the nurses walked by him, he would pinch them or he would pat them or he would grab at them. He did whatever he wanted to. He could do whatever he wanted because he was crazy. Well, finally we got to have our counseling session, and they put us in a room, and this was a room for doctors, and it was the only room that didn't have bars on the windows. It did have bars on the door. And so they put us in this room, and they closed the door, and the guards went off, and as soon as they closed the door, he turned around to me and said, I'm going to jump out the window and kill myself. Well, I looked out the window, and there weren't any guards, and went over and moved the coffee table and said, hit it. And I looked, I said, no one's coming, hit it. I said, I mean, hit it. So he took off flying as fast as he could, chugging down this room. It was about the length of this thing. And then before he can get to the window, I thought, well, if he goes out, he's not any worse off than he is. And before he can get to the window, he tries to hit the skids and then slap right up against the window, and he falls down flat on the ground. And I went over and looked at him, and he rolls up and he looks at me and he says, that's crazy, isn't it? I said, it is, but the fact that you know it's crazy tells me you're not crazy. You knew exactly what you were doing. And I said, I want to tell you something. You listen very clearly. The party's over. Because your sisters will never call you again. They'll never receive a call. You'll never get a letter. There's no more cookies coming. There's no more visits coming. You're going to stay here and you're going to rot. That's going to be my advice. I said, I watched you all day. You've played this thing and played it and played it. You don't have any responsibilities. You don't have to work. You don't have to do anything at all. And I said, I notice every time the nurses go by, you're grabbing them. They don't slap you silly because you're crazy. I said, I'm thinking about going mad myself. You got everything working for you. You've got a vested interest in this. And so some people are actually just hiding back here and playing that game. One missionary said that one of the things that he saw that vexed him so much was how self-centered people in mental institutions were. Before World War I, he said, and he was doing missions in Spain, that Spain had more mental institutions than any other place in all of Europe. And then the war broke out and they dwindled. And then before World War II came, they had more mental institutions than anywhere in Europe. And he was going to the mental institutions and trying to get the people just to take sheets and tear them into bandages for the wounded soldiers, and he couldn't get them to do that much. See, we slowly go insane as we're consumed with ourselves. The only way I can be satisfied is that each day I have to have given myself to something that's bigger than myself. And since you're created in the image of God, the only thing that's bigger than yourself is God. But if I give myself to myself, I slowly become more and more insane and more ingrown and more self-centered. Now, some people do go back in here, and it's part of our ministry that we want to go back in there and retrieve those that do let go of the door. I like the way Ray works me when we're out of the country. He says he works for me, but it always looks like I'm working for him, because he's doing what he wants to do, but he's got me stuck with something. So we're in a school out of the country, and we're both working there, and we're lecturing there, and there's a knock on the door, and this fellow says to me from this Bible school, "Ray sent me to you." And he said, "Ray said that you'd be very interested in talking to me." And I said, "Well, okay, I got lectures here in just a few minutes, but sit down. Or if Ray sent you, there must have been some reason that Ray sent you." And so he sat down, and he said, "You know, this stuff you're talking about is really exciting. Abiding in Christ, having Christ in your midst, having Christ flow through you." And Ray said, "You'd really be excited to hear what I've got to tell you." I said, "Well, what is it?" And he said, "I am Jesus." And he smiled. And of course, I'm thinking about Ray. I know exactly why Ray sent the fellow to me. And I said, "Well, listen, brother, you're not Jesus. But let's take a look at that. Why?" And I sat down and took a little history from him. And what he'd done is he'd committed what I would call suicide of the soul. And what happened is, he said that he didn't know who his father was. His mother had met a man in a bar and gotten pregnant. And he carried in his wallet a little cutout of a sailor that came out of just a magazine, just an ad. And his mom had said that that was his dad, and he'd had it since he was a little kid, but it wasn't. It was just an ad. You could see it on the other side. And then she told him that when I told your father that I was pregnant, all his response was to me was, "Take a clothes hanger and yank him out and flush him." That was what your dad said. So when we look at someone like that, his image and identity over here is something that you ought to flush and kill. How would you like to be that? How would you like to live with that? And he's a thinker obsessing on that all the time. So it's an interesting thing that we know the way out is death. Somehow we know the way out is death. What this fellow did then is just kill this, the suicide of the soul, the suicide of the image, the identity. He killed it himself and swung all the way over here and picked somebody that he wanted to be that you would never want to flush, which is Jesus. Well, what would happen then is when he was saying that he was Jesus, they would medicate him and he would go back to being something that you ought to flush. And then after a while he would go back over to this, and then he would go back over to that. And what I presented him with was a third option, and the third option is, let's not become something we flush, and let's not become Jesus, but let's become something new called a child of God. Let's not us suicide out our soul. Let's crucify the old Adam life and become a child of God. And you know, I've checked on that guy several times, and he's moved forward, and he's not something you ought to flush anymore, and he's not Jesus anymore. Now again, I'm not saying that this is always a game that people are playing, because we might have to go in there and get somebody, and we want to do that. And on the other hand, there's some real advantages to this. And people get a hold of their idolatry, and do they really want to lose it? Again, a fellow came in and he was suicidal because he was struggling with homosexuality and ready to kill himself. And he'd struggled with it for so many years. And I said, "Well, brother, what do you do when you have pressure at work?" "Well, I always end up at the gay bar." "Well, what do you do if you're having trouble with your wife?" "Well, I always end up at the gay park." I said, "Well, what do you do if everything around you is going against you?" "Well, I just lay in bed and fantasize." And I said, "Well, I have a question for you. If I snap my fingers and take this away from you, what are you going to do when you're struggling in your marriage, when things aren't going well at work, or when everything's pitted against you? What are you going to do? Do you really want me to take this away from you? If I could give you a pill right now and you could take it and it would go away, would you take it?" I said, "Just be honest, because you can't leave where you are until you admit where you are." And he goes, "I don't know what I would do." He said, "I'm really not sure that I'd even take the pill." See, we hang on to these idols and we have a love-hate relationship with them. Well, God's always up to the challenge, and He's going to cure me of my idolatry. So it looks like this as we go through the cure. When I saw one day that I was going to hell, I needed a Savior. So we accepted Christ as our Savior. But then in our own strength, with our idolatries, trying to change our image and our insanity and our humanity, we head out to live the Christian life. And so what God does, because He doesn't want me living it, He wants to live it through me, He gives me a situation that can only be handled by divinity. It can't be handled by humanity. And so the situation drives me down, and I pull out all of my idols and try to turn the whole thing around. Well, He says, all right, if you want to play that game, then we'll put you in a worse situation. And we try to fix that one, and so He just puts me in a worse one, and a worse one, and a worse one, and a worse one. So one fellow I know says this, that God, if you fix the fix, that God fixed to fix you, He'll fix another fix to fix you, and brother, you'll be fixed. And I understand what he means, because it's happened to me. If you fix the fix, He'll fix another fix to fix you, and you're going to finally end up to the place where you're absolutely fixed. Now, one of the problems that we have as we minister to other people, we look at our families, we want to rescue people as they're going down to find Christ as their life. So we're actually part of the process. And I've said this before, that Christian parents are the oddest group of people I've ever met, because they want to make sure and keep their kids from everything that brought them to Jesus. Does that mean that I don't fight with my kids? Does that mean I don't set standards? Does that mean there isn't discipline? No, I do all of that. But at the same time, in the back of my mind, my prayer is this: Father, you allow enough into their life that they see they need you, but you don't allow enough into their life that they're destroyed, please. That they've got to go through those things, and we don't want them to go through it because of image, but I count all things as rubbish in view of the surpassing value of knowing Christ Jesus. I don't care what it is, it's rubbish. And good counseling and good discipleship is knowing when not to counsel and when not to disciple. It's knowing when to let someone go ahead and go to the bottom so they can find Him. And we're not rescuing them and always trying to pull them back and pull them back. Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. But if you take my yoke and you do things the way I did it, the man who did everything that did nothing, you'll actually find rest. And so again, I'm discovering what I cannot do as I come down to this place of a conviction of weakness. Jay was mentioning it happens in New Mexico. Where I saw it was in the Philippines, and that's where they still crucify people. And you have to volunteer to be crucified. Others can't volunteer you, which is why I haven't been crucified. But what they do, and it's an interesting thing, is that they put you on a cross and they stretch out your hands, and then the Romans would bend your knees, and they put the spike through your foot, and they put the spike through your wrist. Now what kills you in crucifixion, and you know this, is that you begin to suffocate and your lungs fill with water. This was a genius, just ingenious to punish someone this way. Because when you're suffocating and you can't stand the pain any longer, the reason they've bent your knees is so you can push down on the nail and straighten up and get a breath. And now you can breathe. The problem is you've taken away the pain in your chest, but now there's pain in your feet. You can only take that so long, so what you have to do is bend your knees again, go back to suffocating. When you can't take that, straighten them again, and go back to your feet hurting. It's recorded that some people were able to live 4 to 5 days on a cross. Now, the driving force of the cross is pride. And so all you do is continue to punish yourself because you're not going anywhere. Where are you going? What are you doing? And yet you keep pushing and driving, so the man with the most pride is going to stay there the longest and prove something, but he hasn't proved anything. And isn't it amazing that Jesus only lived minutes on the cross? Because He never did straighten His legs. Father, this is where you put me. I'm not rebelling against it. This is where I am. And He wouldn't fight the cross. The Romans would actually, and we read about it, would take some guy and look at him and say, "You're hopeless, man. I mean, you're just hopeless. How long are you going to go on?" And they would take a stick and they'd break their legs and bring an end to it. Sometimes God just needs to break our legs so we'll give up and we'll quit and we'll say that we can't and I can't go on, and I'll bow the knee to Him. I like this church in Copenhagen where they told us there's the most beautiful statue of Jesus. And the face, you've got to see the face and the eyes and the passion that's in His face. And you get in there and it just looks like a normal statue. And then the caretaker says to you, "Well, if you really want to see the face, you got to get on your knees. That's how it's made." So you get on your knees and you see all the beauty you'd been told about. And it's fun to just hang around there because the Buddhists come in, the Hindus come in, the atheists come in. Whoever comes in, if they want to see the beauty, they got to bow the knee. And they all go over there and they bow the knee to Jesus. And I just think to myself, one day every knee will bow. And they'll see Him. They'll see clearly who He is. It's not until I'm broken and I'm bowing that I actually see the beauty of Christ and everything that He is. In my broken state, I'm able to see that. And I come to the end of this and I'm ready to give up those idols and not trust Him anymore. Now, how do I give up those idols? Where do I start with that? And again, everything in the Christian life is incredibly simple, and it doesn't move beyond something that the head can do. So it's not going to be any more difficult than the little head on the ground can handle. How do I give up my idols? It's very simple. I give them up with the words in my mouth. Jesus, they're yours. I give it to you. Now, here's how we've been taught giving things to God is. I'm going to give God this pen, so I throw it in the air and it comes back to me. Have you ever heard anyone say, "Well, I gave it to God, but He took it back," or "I took it back"? And so I'm going to give it to God, but I took it back, and I'm going to give it to God, but I took it back, and the thing keeps coming back, and each time it comes back, it's a little heavier and a little heavier, until finally I guess I'm just stuck with it. I'll tell you something about God. He's very stingy, and He won't let you be an Indian giver. If you give Him anything, He takes it, and that's it. And He takes it the first time you gave it to Him. So the example I use, if I send a contract around this room and I get you to sign it, and you sign it, and it says that I own all of your earthly possessions, just because I don't come tomorrow, don't think I'm not coming. I'll come and get it when I want to get it. It's up to me when I come and get it. And I'll remind you that I have the contract and that it is legally mine. So when I have things, I give them up to God and I rest with it. I don't know how many of you have come to the place I have with your children where one day you just say, "I can't carry it. I can't carry the whole thing anymore. I cannot carry it. I'm giving them to you, Father. I just give the whole thing to you and I quit. I can't." And you know, I just like Him to remind me that I did give that to Him and that He's working. I had an incredible thing happen to me this summer. It was beautiful. I was walking along and I realized something had happened. And then the Lord reminded me that I had prayed for that 30 years ago one time. Now, you know, we're taught in prayer you just assault the gates of heaven with your prayers and you keep going and going and going and you don't quit, you know, and it all depends on you. And the more you can say it, you can finally just wear God down and make Him come and do what you want Him to do. And it was amazing that He gave me the memory to remember 30 years ago I prayed that one time and He answered it. And He just spoke to me and said, "See, Mike, I never forget." Well, since that day, I can't just go on and on and on. You got to have this confidence that if I've given it to Him, I know that He's taken it. Again, we could give something, and you hear this all the time in the church, just crack the door to Satan, just crack the door to Satan. All you got to do is just crack the door to Satan, and Satan's going to be in your life, and Satan's going to be in your house. And did you ever play with a Ouija board as a kid? You know, you've cracked the door to Satan, you've done that. You better go around the house and see if your aunt gave you anything. What about your granddad? He was a Mason. Did he give you anything from the Masons? You happen to have something from the Masons around the house? Oh my, I think I do. I think I got a Mason pen in the drawer. That's where your problem's coming from. Get that Mason pen out of there. Just crack the door to Satan, and there he is. But you can open the door wide to Jesus, and nothing's going to happen, is it? I mean, I don't understand that. I can give Him everything and give Him my life and everything around me, but nothing's going to happen. Well, it is going to happen. I just give it to Him. And I used to believe that God would work if I was 95% serious about it. When I gave it to Him, He would act. Then I thought, well, my experience is teaching me I've only got to be 50%. And then all of a sudden I started saying I only need to be about 1%. I warned people, don't give it to God if you don't want Him to take it. And now I can see that He'll actually operate on anything above nothing. That's what He'll work on. I liked one of the Africans that said to me, he said, you know, all I am is a zero, and I can think of all the zeros in my life. And I'm just one great big zero in everything I do, until one day I added the one named Jesus. And then all my zeros became something so great I can no longer count it. Well, we simply add the one to everything. He's the one that we add to it. I give these things up to Him, and I know that He's going to take them. Now, don't fall into this trap which says, when I clean myself up, God will hear me. Instead, go to God and let Him clean you up, and He'll hear you from the beginning. So we don't want to be in that trap. We always present ourselves to God, no better and no worse. The issue is that I've presented myself to God. It's not my condition. And when I come to this place then, where I give up everything, I'll begin to move up here in spiritual power. Because it'll be His life flowing and living through me. I do not believe that you can go from here to here without coming down here. It's all part of the purpose of life and the purpose of the world and what it's doing in my life. So one of the things we ask people to do is to take a sheet of paper, write on that piece of paper all the problems that they have, everything that they worry about. And so we can put all the stuff that we carry here. And then to take that piece of paper and to go in a room alone by yourself and just take it and hold it up to God and let Him get a good look at it. And say, these are all the things I worry about. These are all my problems. How am I supposed to handle this? And hold it up for 20 minutes and let Him look at it. Then hold it up another 10. Then hold it up another 5. And at the end of 35 minutes, this piece of paper will weigh what it really weighs. And then you'll have a revelation. Do you know what, Father? I can't hold the paper that the problems are written on. Maybe you didn't create me to hold the problems. I give up and I quit and I can't. And take the piece of paper and fold it and sign it and date it and say, today I gave it, and I know that He took it. And from then on, when you're worrying about it, go get that piece of paper out and look at that and say, I know that He took it. And do you know you'll have the same experience 30 years from now? You'll realize that He answered a prayer because He took it then. It's vexing the way most of us live. And I'm only preaching out of my own weakness and the things that I've done myself. But I often like to use this illustration. That I get up in the morning and I've got a backpack and a big stack of bricks. And on each of the bricks is written one of my problems, one of my worries, one of my sins, something deed of the flesh, whatever it is. And I fill up this bag. So I put in Betty in the bag, and I put the kids in the bag, and I put the finances in the bag, and I put the ministry in the bag, and everything's in the bag. And then I put this backpack on my shoulders until it cuts into my back. And then I head out down the road with this huge burden and a stack of tracts. Would you like to know Jesus, brother, and have the joy of the Lord that I have? I was never suicidal till I met Jesus. How would you like to meet Him? You see how happy I am, brother? Here, I'd like you to have a tract. And the hypocrisy of that, when we're carrying those heavy, heavy loads as a believer, and then telling people, you know, Jesus came that you might have life and have it more miserable. Abundantly. And we're going on talking like that, and then making appeals to evangelism and sharing with the neighbors and all those kind of things, while inwardly, if they could just see what I looked like in front of them. And I'm going down the road and I can't handle it anymore. And then Jesus pulls up in an old 1950 Chevy pickup. Mike, you look exhausted. I am. Well, get in. I'll give you a ride. Thank you. And I get in with my backpack on and we bounce down the road. It's still cutting into my shoulders. And then I say, get closer to the ditch. I want to hand out some tracts. Hey, look at me. I'm with Jesus. Here, I'll give you a tract. See what it's like to be with Jesus? And he looks at me and he says, Mike, why don't you throw the bag in the back? And I said, Lord, I couldn't ask you to carry that too. But he is carrying it, isn't he? I'm just not enjoying the trip. He's carrying me all the time. Why should I be carrying that? Why don't I take it off and enjoy it? And one day I came to the place where I just said this to myself. I am not going to say I have a God and live like I don't have a God. Either I have a God or I don't have a God, and I do have a God. And I'm going to live like a sparrow, and I'm not going to carry the burden. And the thing is going to be light, and I am offloading onto Him. And I'm not going to have worries anymore. Because when it comes to the things of God, you either believe Him or prove Him, don't you? And it doesn't do any good. I'm proving that I can't carry any of that. I'm proving it in my own life. So now I'm going to believe it that He's carrying it, and I'm going to say that I have a God and live as though I have a God. And then we enter into the freedom and the rest that He wants us to have. I'm born dead to God in the Spirit. That made me self-centered. It made me insane. It made me controlled by my emotions. It gave me an image that I can't stand and I'm trying to change. And then I've fallen into idolatry and I'm trusting things that can never help me and I'm going crazier. My self-life needs to be denied daily. Now we'll come back and we'll talk about why I would be looking at those idols to begin with.